بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته, and welcome to فقه المعاملات online course. And today topics is basically a continuation of the previous discussions where we started talking about the prohibitions of Gharar. So we have covered a few points related to the Gharar, and today we carry on the discussion. So basically, again, we have agreed that Sharia basically doesn't allow to involve the gharar, which is a kind of uncertainty and lack of information and knowledge within the business transactions, and try to emphasize on the full disclosure and informations pertaining to the transactions in order to give the option to the contracting party to express their concern and then accepting to the transactions based on the sound information that have been provided. Now we talk about some of the area where the gharar could emerge. We will highlight those points, then we'll try to elaborate on each one of them. The first one, the gharar could involve in exchange contract, meaning that it is more applicable to the exchange contract, not to the tabarrua contract. That's number one. Number two, the gharar that we are referring to here is the excessive gharar that we have mentioned, and we'll talk about it. And number three, the gharar does exist in the subject matter primary, meaning that's where it does exist strongly, and that's where mostly the debate is, talking about the subject matter itself. And here we are referring mainly to the what's so-called price and goods, and we'll talk about it. And the number four is basically this kind of contract is needed and considered by a market as a necessity to the financial transactions, which means that if the contract is not needed or regarded as a necessity to the business and trade, tolerance of the gharar may not be granted. So that's basically the four criteria or the four elements that basically may impact the gharar, and we start with the first one. The first one, as we mentioned, is that the conditions, or this is like you can mention this is like the four parameters to determine the gharar. If I may put a title to these 4 points, they are regarded as the control measurements. You can say it's a parameters to determine the gharar. So it's number one, the existence of the gharar in the exchange contract. Number two, the gharar is excessive. And number three, the gharar is more related to the subject matter, and the transactions in hand is regarded as one of the transactions needed or under needs or under haja as far as the categorizations of maqasid al-sharia is concerned. So let's start with the parameter or the condition number one, which is basically the gharar should or does exist in the exchange contract. So basically Sharia contract are divided into two, exchange contract and tabarruat contract. So the impact of the gharar is on the exchange contract, not on tabarrua contract. Exchange contract, we call them also uqud al-muawadat, such as sales, lease, and partnership, and others. So these are uqud muawadat or exchange contract, whereby tolerance of the gharar is very limited. Sharia doesn't tolerate the existence of uncertainty, lack of informations in those contracts. For example, you want to buy something, you can't conclude the contract and you say, I don't know how this one it cost, meaning you don't know the price, or you determine the price, but I don't know what kind of currency you are referring to. or I'm buying this, but there is a lack of information. Whatever question I ask about the subject matter, you tell me I don't know, or I don't have the information. And you know, when I ask about the delivery, you are not sure about it. If you want to lease an apartment, you don't know which tower you are referring to, and if you refer to the tower, you don't know which floor, and if you determine the floor, you don't know which unit, and if you determine the unit, you don't give the informations related to the unit, like for example the size, whether it is furnished or semi-furnished, or it's an empty apartment, and whatever information I ask. So there is a kind of scarcity in the information. So those are exchange contract, and the exchange contract, they don't tolerate uncertainty. Some minor uncertainty, as we mentioned, could be tolerated. For example, you know, what kind of painting, the color of the house. Well, I'm not sure about that one. For example, how about the bills? Did the previous tenant pay the bill or not? I'm not sure about this, but we can fix it. We'll check it later on. So there are some small things, you know, that could be somehow tolerated in concluded transactions, because they don't represent a major component in the entire business transactions. Normally people tend to tolerate and tend to forgive and tend to ignore the lack of information in those kind of specification or kind of information, so it doesn't impact the entire contract. But if it is significant, as we mentioned in the sales, you know, or it is regarded as a very significant aspect in buying the item, so that one could be what's so-called a major, what's so-called a gharar, that may impact the validity of the contract. So going back again, gharar and uncertainty is the exchange contract. Now, if you move to the tabarruk contract or the donation contract, the gharar is not applicable. For example, gifts, donations, and other contract under the category of tabarruk contract, those lack of informations, they don't impact significantly the contract. Example, if I give you a gift and you don't know what's the subject, what is this item that I give it to you, it doesn't impact the gift. If you don't know the color, if you don't know the item, if I tell you, for example, it's a pen, but you don't know what kind of pen, what kind of, what's the color, what's the brand, so you don't, it doesn't matter anyway. Or I give you a mobile, you don't know what's the brand of the mobile, and if I mention the brand, I don't know what's the type and what's the specification, it doesn't matter. I give you a book, you don't know what kind of book, is Arabic or in English, is it in Islamic finance, Islamic economic, or it's a novel, it is for kids, so it doesn't matter. So lack of information in the donation contract, so basically, or tabarruk contract, doesn't impact the validity of the subject matter. Just give you a very good example how the gharar may impact the two. If, for example, you sell a container with the mixed food items, food stuff, you know, very like coffee, milk, tea, cooking oil, butter, you know, cheese, whatever, you know, it's a mixed container of food stuff, and you send the container with delivery order and overall price and a very broad packing list. For example, just items: coffee, milk, tea, sugar, flour, wheat, barley, dates, just itemize with the full amount of the price, let's say $20,000 US. And there is no prior discussion, there is no prior basically discussions with the buyer. So this is from Sharia standpoint, if it is not supported by other documentations and details, because we are just giving the scenario to understand the difference between gharar which may exist in exchange contract and gharar that may exist in the tabarru or a voluntary contract. Just give you an example, a scenario, so you bear with me on the example. So again, you send a mixed food item to a buyer, whereby you send the delivery order, you send the invoice of $20,000 and you send the overall packing list, very broad, coffee, this itemized, and that's it. So from Sharia standpoint, this one could not be what's so-called valid because of the lack of information. For example, if you pick up the coffee, what type of coffee? There are many brands. And if you pick up the brand, what's the ingredients and the details of the coffee? Is there any kind of brand that agree upon when you mention it? What's the packing of the what's so-called coffee, whether it is a half cook, or it is raw material, it is finished product, it is packed in cans, packed in paper box, in the how many boxes, and in the box how many the box will be in the carton, and the carton how many cartons, and so on. So many information and details that could impact the validity of the what's so-called sales. And the same goes for the milk. What kind of milk, you know, the brand, the packing, the quantity, the quality, the spec, and so on and so forth. That's why those informations are needed in order to provide what's so-called sound what's so-called offer and acceptance reflected in price and goods, and of course lead to the compliance and the validity of the contract. Now, same container, which is not valid in a sales-based transaction, same mixed food container, you send it to a school, orphanage school. You send it to some neighborhoods, which is basically suffering from this pandemic and this coronavirus, COVID-19, that the humanity is suffering from it. That creates the global chaos and the financial crisis and slowdown in the economic recession, economic, and so on and so forth. People are suffering, so what you did, you just send the mixed items as a donation. So what's the validity of the contract? Is this contract valid or not? Yes, it is valid. But you will tell me you didn't provide the information, you didn't provide the price, you didn't provide the types of commodity and the brands and the packing. So I will tell you it doesn't matter. Why? Because that gharar, it is in a voluntary contract. It is in a gift. And you keep in mind that the voluntary contract, tabarru'at contract, have the power to absorb the gharar. You have the power to absorb the lack of information. They tolerate ignorance, lack of informations. Whereby, on the contrary, exchange contract, they don't have this kind of power to absorb the gharar. This is why gharar is not allowed in exchange contracts such as sales and lease, but it is allowed in a tabarru contract such as gift and donation. Gharar is not tolerated in exchange contracts such as sale, but it is tolerated in a voluntary contract such as gift. So you have to distinguish where the gharar does exist. Is it an exchange contract? So you have to be careful. Or if it is in a voluntary contract, you can be very flexible, very easy, and you don't care too much about gharar, uncertainty, ignorance, lack of information, because there is no consideration, there is no price, and it is given as a what's so-called a gift. So that's the point number one. It does exist in the exchange contract, not the tabarru contract. That's number one. Number two is that the gharar may exist in the expression of the contract and may exist in the subject matter. As you know, the pillar of the contracts are three: the contracting party, buyer and seller, the sigha, which is the offer and acceptance, and the what's so-called subject matter, price and goods. So it may exist in the offer and acceptance, the sigha, meaning the sigha that was expressed is not clear, it has no very clear about the stand of the person, what's he willing to buy or not, the way that he expressed, the way he engaged with you, and so on and so forth. The communication is not clear. The maybe video conferencing or the communication is not clear, or he didn't express his resolutions, determinations, intentions, commitments to purchase. So it may exist how the contract is formulated and how the contract is established and how the offer and acceptance they have been issued. The gharar may exist there. So for example, I say I hereby sold you this mobile with such and such amount. Then instead of, for example, giving me the acceptance, you would engage in a very strange conversation, which has nothing to do with my offer. So it doesn't give me a kind of clearance and creates ambiguity about your stand to conclude the contract or not. So this is a kind of gharar that may impact the offer and acceptance and respectively the contract. For example, when you issue the offer and acceptance, you will say, I'm going to buy or I will buy. So in this kind of statement, there is a kind of ambiguity, whether it's regarded as a promise or it is a commitment to buy, because normally when you issue the offer and acceptance, normally do use the past tense, I hereby purchase or I hereby bought or I hereby sold, to show the intention of the contracting party that they are engaging fully with the contract and they have very clear intention on what they are doing. But if you see I'm going to buy or will buy, so again it may create a kind of ambiguity and a vague, informations what the intention of this person is about. And the gharar could exist also in the subject matter, the price, currency, type of currency, type of payments, cash or on spot, letter of credit, collections, spot, defer, you don't know exactly, or the subject matter itself, specifications, the commodity, the type of commodity, specification of the commodity, and the other related information. So mostly the gharar would exist in the formation of the contract to the offer and acceptance, or could exist as well in the subject matter, price, and goods. So that's basically the first item or the first parameters that determine the existence of gharar, which is basically that gharar is what's so-called exist in an exchange contract, and of course respectively it may exist in the form of the contract, meaning the offer and acceptor, or in the subject matter. This is the first parameters. I think we just stop here and we carry on the other parameters in the coming session, inshallah. With that, thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.